Alright, so I'm basically in the dream world, right? That means I can look any way I want to. Oh, yeah. I look good. I mean, really good. Hey everyone! Come and see how good I look! Welcome back, everyone, to my look at the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Today, Freddy tries to eliminate the remaining Elm Street kids in Part 3, Dream Warriors. The reception to Freddy's Revenge was less than stellar among fans and critics alike. Even after it made more money domestically than the original, New Line was unsure if the franchise would proceed due to the backlash. However, they sought out Wes Craven to see if he would like to return and script the third installment. He did write one that was intended to end the series, but the studio wasn't thrilled, as it seemed more gruesome, vulgar, and cluttered than what they were looking for. Enter Chuck Russell.
The whole series was in question. They really didn't know if they wanted to continue. So I was pushing the company itself. Let's make the third more fun. Let's take the boundaries of imagination a little bit further in the whole series.
I give Chuck complete credit for what happened with the script in Nightmare 3, he and Frank Darabont.
The original script to Elm Street 3 was darker and actually profane. It was, I think Wes was trying to take it even into a more horrific place. And I was much more interested in the imaginative elements of the piece.
And yes, you did hear that correctly. Frank Darabont, the man behind The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, helped write a Nightmare on Elm Street film. They kept elements from Wes's original script, focusing on a group of suicidal teens in a mental institute, but putting their own imaginative spin on it, including a backstory for Freddy. A big cast was recruited, including Patricia Arquette in her first movie role, and Lawrence Fishburne, who at the time was being credited as Larry. New characters were introduced while bringing in some familiar faces from the original as well. Would the Dream Warriors prevail and bouncing back from the sophomore slump that was Freddy's Revenge? Let's find out. The movie begins with a young girl named Kristen, clearly trying to stay awake and occupied by building a creepy papier-mâché house, but she's interrupted and sent to bed by her nagging mother. She has a nightmare involving her following a little girl into the house she just finished building. She finds the girl and narrowly escapes the clutches of Freddy, only to stumble upon a room filled with all the murdered kids of Elm Street. She wakes up and heads to the bathroom, but there's a surprise attack from Freddy, who slits her wrists, making it look like a suicide attempt. This gets Kristen sent straight to Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital, where we meet Max, Dr. Neil Gordon, and Dr. Sims, who discuss the sudden outbreak of suicidal teens in their facility. However, Neil's assistance is requested when Kristen freaks out over being threatened with sedation and starts singing the jump rope song.
Never sleep again.
Well, look who decided to show.
Nancy, the hospital's new intern therapist, calms down Kristen with ease and later gets a chance to introduce herself to Neil. The two hit it off fairly well as Nancy explains she specializes in dream therapy. After she leaves, Neil notices a nun who quickly disappears. Uh-oh, creepy nuns. Watch out, Neil, this could get ugly. The next day, Max introduces Nancy to a few more of the kids, including Philip, the sleepwalking puppeteer, and Kincaid, the smartass tough guy who's prone to outbursts. They pass by Joey, who is a mute, so no conversation to be had there. Nancy visits Kristen's mother to talk about her daughter's nightmares, but she's honestly a bitch who thinks Kristen exaggerates for attention. Nancy goes upstairs and finds the house Kristen was building, which is a replica of her old house. Around the same time, Kristen falls asleep and is back in the Elm Street house where she is attacked and nearly swallowed whole by a giant Freddy snake. However, she's able to call out to Nancy, who slips into the nightmare, rescues Kristen, and reunites with her old tormentor.
Oh my god.
This is such an awesome moment. The two enemies face to face again after all this time, and Freddy's "you" is so menacing. The one that got away is back, and he is pissed. The next day, a group meeting is held, giving Nancy a chance to meet several other patients. There's Will, the wheelchair-bound nerd, Taryn, the recovering junkie, and Jennifer, the aspiring actress. They discuss how they're all being terrorized by the same man in their dreams, and yet no one believes them, especially Dr. Sims, who tries to use a logical explanation for their nightmares.
Psychological scars stemming from moral conflicts and overt sexuality.
Great, and that's my dick that's killing me.
That night, we see Will putting Joey in charge of watch patrol in case he starts to have a nightmare. Meanwhile, Nancy and Neil are having dinner where she reveals her mother died and that she's lost contact with her father. She goes on to express interest in giving the kids a sleep suppressor called Hypnosil.
You want me to prescribe an experimental psychoactive drug to a bunch of suicidal teenagers?
No! Well, yes.
Back at the hospital, Marionette Freddy is shown creeping up on Philip, who is made into Freddy's puppet after his veins are ripped out to make useful strings. It appears like Philip is sleepwalking again, so no one seems to care. That is, until he's spotted on the roof, looking like he's gonna jump. I love this kill because the effects make it look excruciatingly painful. You can almost feel it when Freddy slits open his arms and legs and rips out Philip's tendons to parade him around. The shot of Freddy in the sky as the puppet master is cool, and we see he's gone back to his method of making his murders look more like accidents, removing any suspicion of his presence. As we see the next morning in group therapy, when Neil and Dr. Sims blame Philip's death on suicide while the kids try to convince them that he was murdered by the man in their dreams. The argument leads Kincaid to freak out, earning him sedation and a night in the quiet room. After all this, Neil approaches Dr. Sims with the suggestion that they put all the kids on Hypnosil to get rid of their nightmares, much to Sims' surprise. That night, Jennifer is alone in the TV room trying to keep herself awake, watching the Dick Cavett show.
Can I ask you something?
Certainly.
Who gave that fuck what you think?
Jennifer is scared, but for some reason thinks it's a smart move to approach the now screaming static TV, of course leading to her capture and death.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big breaking TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch.
Top 5 Freddy kill, and absolutely my favorite one-liner, which is funny because it was an ad-lib from Robert Englund.
Welcome to prime time, bitch, was not a scripted line. That was from Robert.
That, which, you know, was a modification of the original line because it didn't quite fit in my mouth, but people loved that.
Everyone gathers for Jennifer's funeral. Guess they didn't have one for poor Philip, where Neil meets the nun he saw earlier, who introduces herself as Sister Mary. She offers advice on how to stop what's happening to his patients, but when Nancy shows up, Mary has mysteriously disappeared. At another group meeting, Nancy admits to believing the kids and reveals to them that she knows the man haunting them because she's dealt with him before. He's a child killer named Fred Krueger, who was burned alive by their parents, and he's seeking out to finish his revenge by killing them, the last of the Elm Street children. But they all have hidden dream powers, like Kristen, who has the ability to pull others into her nightmares. To test this, they all undergo hypnosis to fall asleep, but it doesn't appear to work. This gives Joey time to slip out of the room and meet up with Nurse Marcy, who he has a crush on. But back in the room, the group finds out that they actually are asleep, and each of them starts to discover their dream power. Will can now walk and use magic as the Wizard Master. Kristen is also a talented gymnast, Kincaid has super strength, and then there's Taryn.
In my dreams, I'm beautiful. And bad.
That is without a doubt the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Meanwhile, Joey is seduced by Nurse Marcy, but oh God, no, it's actually Freddy in disguise who manages to take Joey hostage over a pit of hell. The group has their room begin to close in on them, but Dr. Sims wakes them all up in the nick of time, except Joey, who is now in a coma. Neil and Nancy are fired for their unorthodox methods, but before Neil can leave, he finds Sister Mary in a section of the facility that used to be for the mentally insane, but was abandoned after a scandal in the 1940s. Sister Mary explains that there was a young caretaker who was accidentally locked in with the inmates for days. She was raped countless times, and by the time she was found, she was with child.
That girl was Amanda Krueger. Her child,
Freddy.
the bastard son of 100 maniacs.
That is fucked up. Like, it's bad enough that Freddy is a child killer, but now we find out he's the product of a poor girl who was raped by hundreds of psychotic mental patients? That is incredibly dark, but adds to just how evil Krueger really is. Sister Mary advises Neil that the only way Freddy can be beaten is to find his remains and bury them in hallowed ground. Neil retells this whole story to Nancy, who thinks she knows someone who can help them find Freddy's remains. She leads them to a bar where her father, Donald Thompson, has clearly spiraled since the events of the original. He opts to not help them, and Nancy storms out, but Neil stays behind and demands Donald tell him exactly where Freddy's remains were hidden. This roughing up actually worked, and Donald accompanies Neil to a church where he grabs some holy water and a cross, and they eventually end up at a junkyard that holds Krueger's bones. Nancy returns to Weston Hills after hearing that Kristen has been sedated and sent to the quiet room. Max refuses to let Nancy see her, but allows her to say goodbye to the other kids. She takes this opportunity to ask Kincaid, Will, and Taryn if they will join her in her rescue of Joey and Kristen.
Let's go kick the motherfucker's ass all over Dreamland.
They manage to make it to Kristen, but they're quickly split up by Freddy. Kristen ends up back in her room at the home, and things play out exactly like they did at the beginning of the movie. Has this all just been Kristen's dream?
I said, where's the fucking bourbon?
Of course not. Kristen escapes Freddy but ends up back in the Elm Street house. Taryn has been teleported to a shady back alley where she gets a few hits in on Freddy before he tempts her with her old dirty habit.
Let's get high.
This is another great kill because while the hypodermic needles are a frightening cool look, it's a good display of Freddy using a character's biggest weakness against them. Psychological torment can be the scariest. After that, Will is attacked by a giant spiked wheelchair, but he uses the powers of the Wizard Master to destroy it and inflict damage on Freddy. But it doesn't go well.
I don't believe in fairy tales.
Kristen, Nancy, and Kincaid have a celebratory reunion. The others are currently being killed, guys, just saying. But they enter a door that leads them down to the boiler room where they manage to save Joey. Only problem is, their dream powers are no use for Freddy's as the souls of the children give him more than enough strength. Suddenly, he disappears because Neil and Donald have found Freddy's remains and are preparing for a holy burial. Only problem is Freddy borrows some Ray Harryhausen effects and becomes a reanimated skeleton that manages to kill Nancy's dad and knock out Neil in the grave he was digging. Nancy's group finds themselves in a hall of Freddy mirrors, and they all get pulled in except Joey, who finds his dream power. Everyone is freed, and Nancy, who has dealt with Freddy on multiple occasions, truly believes that this was able to kill him. I'm sorry, but that is incredibly dumb of someone who is the expert on all of this. Her dad comes down in a heavenly light, informing her that he's passed on and sorry for all the grief he's caused. They share a nice hug, and all is well.
You gotta be fucking kidding me! That's ridiculous!
This is kind of a crap way for such a good character to go out. Nancy is way smarter than that and should have known there was no way Freddy was dead and that wasn't her father. She does briefly come back to save Kristen by stabbing Freddy with his own glove, while Neil, who is still alive, says a prayer, sprays the remains with holy water, and finalizes it all with a cross to the skull. At Nancy's funeral, Neil sees Sister Mary one last time and discovers she was actually Freddy's mother, Amanda Kruger, all along. All of this calls for a good night's sleep.
Dun 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 dun.
My overall thoughts on Dream Warriors. It's easily my second favorite in the franchise. This has everything a perfect sequel should have. There are a lot of characters here, but it somehow doesn't feel too cluttered. Each of them has their own little traits that make them memorable, and while you're waiting for the insane deaths from Freddy, you feel bad for everyone when they do bite it. Most importantly, it brings back original characters, mixes them in with fresh new ones, and makes you care about them equally. This is my favorite cast of all the movies, and that includes the original. It takes good writing to create a cast in a slasher movie that you want to survive, and they nailed it. I'd say that of the new group, Kincaid is my favorite with his smartass retorts and willingness to fight back, whether it's against Freddy or the doctors. This is definitely the heaviest on story as the focus shifts quite often from the teens to Nancy to Neil and Amanda Kruger. But again, I never feel too overwhelmed because everyone's stories are engaging. The kids trying to keep each other safe from Freddy's attacks, Nancy's return, Neil doing everything he can to protect his patients, and Amanda Kruger even providing an origin for Freddy. All of it works cohesively and never feels like too much. While I can't say it's personally scary to me, I think it does a good job of balancing horror with some comedy and a little bit of adventure aspects. This is where we start to see the more humorous Freddy emerge. He doesn't go full stand-up comedian, but his one-liners begin to become more of his character with jokes like, "Welcome to prime time, bitch!" His kills are some of the best here though. The deaths of Philip, Jennifer, and Taryn all make it into my top 10 in the series. They're ingenious and hold up well with the effects. Ugh, and how could I almost forget that the theme song for the movie was done by 80s rock group Dokken. If I had to nitpick, there are only a few things that bug me. It gets a little too fantastical at times with the dreams, especially with the Wizard Master. Nancy's choices towards the end just make no sense to me whatsoever. No way would she believe Freddy was killed with Joey's scream, and she would question that her father beamed down from a heavenly light. It doesn't ruin the character's legacy, but it does make her death more aggravating. And one thing I noticed is that Freddy's voice changes several times throughout. I gave praise to Robert for his evil voice work in Freddy's Revenge, but in this one, it's all over the place. It'll sound normal one scene, then the next it's incredibly too deep, and others it just sounds like Robert Englund's normal voice. It's a small but certainly noticeable criticism. So while I have small gripes, this is a perfect sequel with appealing characters, a well-written story, and amazing death sequences. I give A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors 4.5 TVs out of 5. But let me know your thoughts. Is this your favorite sequel in the series? Do you agree that this is the best cast of characters? And what was your favorite kill? Don't forget to subscribe and follow my Twitter in the link below. Next week, Freddy returns for fresh meat in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. Until next time, peace!